If you haven't been living under a rock, you'll know that just about everyone playing Pokemon Champions can't help but compare it to Pokemon Showdown, a free and open source version battle simulator. The two programs are filling the same niche, a streamlined way to build a Pokemon team and put them to the test against other trainers for ranked points. Since the common consensus is that Pokemon Champions is inferior, I'd like to start with things that it has done well. For starters, it isn't ugly. Graphic appeal is pretty low on my list of important features in a competitive game, but it's still nice to not have to squint at a tiny box to see the game. The pace is a lot slower in terms of how long it takes a full turn to play out, but that gives players a little bit more time to consider their next turn, so it's not strictly a bad thing. Pokemon Champions is free to play, and I have no doubt that it will widen the competitive Pokemon audience scene, especially when it comes to mobile. It's not that Showdown can't already do that, but Pokemon Champions has a lot more power behind it because it's an official release from Pokemon, not a third-party application with no draw of its own. Pokemon Champions is accessible, or at least as accessible as competitive Pokemon can be. The UI is clean, and certain systems were changed for simplicity, such as the removal of IVs. They are showing some attentiveness to players by nerfing overloaded Pokemon like Incineroar, even though they probably should be doing a lot more, and they have reduced the influence of RNG throughout, like with random stat drops. I think overall, this game is a win for competitive Pokemon. However, there is a reason many veteran VGC players are not thrilled to leave Showdown for Champions. Team building is much more powerful on Showdown. It's a little old and clunky at times, but it has outstanding features like searching for a specific Pokemon by type, move, or ability, enabling you to find the perfect Pokemon to fill a niche in your comp, like finding a water type with competitive and has a good defensive stat to counter Incineroar. There's a lot more action on the screen when it comes to selecting items and moves, but I find it much more convenient to see the whole list to choose from, instead of having to scroll through with only a few on the screen at a time. Not to mention the filters here again. The filters are great. I vastly prefer the ugly but effective presentation of information on Showdown. The battle window always has on display how many turns are left of weather, terrain, or screens. You can always see what Pokemon your enemy has to choose from when you're considering your move. You can always see each Pokemon's stat changes. You can hover over an enemy Pokemon and know roughly how much speed it has and each move that it's used so far. This significantly reduces the burden of note-taking while playing and saves a lot of turn time to decide moves. Having all of that information on active display instead of having to dig for it is also critical to turn time. Pokemon Champions did a great thing by exposing all of this information instead of making players try to remember, but it's just not as good as Showdown's. It's completely free to make changes to your team in Showdown, and it costs VP to do so in Champions. Just hearing this seems to be enough for people to flip their lid, but in practice, it's not nearly as bad as it sounds. I think it is a bit over the top how you are nickel and dimed for every change you make to a Pokemon, but so far, I've had no VP issues tweaking my team's stats, moves, and abilities as much as I'd like. You probably will run into limits on how many teams you're able to have ready due to VP and box limit, but I think it's very possible to have a handful on standby. My biggest issue with it is that it discourages change and experimentation simply because it will cost the player something to make that change. Many people will want to hold on to every VP they earn because for some reason that's just how the human mind thinks. Even if players will most likely not run out of VP during their experimentation, the simple fact that it costs to do so will hold people back from half the fun of VGC. There is also something to be said about how, as of right now, the game is not actually 100% free to play. The only way to obtain the megas for Floette, Greninja, Delphox, and Chestnut is to transfer them from the $70 Legends ZA game and have done some significant grinding in them. That is, of course, unless you can find a kind soul on Reddit who will give you those Pokemon. I think that this is largely inexcusable, as Mega Floette has potential to be one of the best mons in the meta. I would like to hope that there will be other ways to obtain them in the future, or that there won't be other cases like this, but this is the Pokemon Company we're talking about here. With all of this in mind, I have to say that I prefer the experience of Showdown to Champions, but comparing these two games to each other is kind of unfair. Showdown gets off really easy because all they have to do is bake in whatever changes Pokemon makes to the game, and it gets to run incredibly cheaply because they don't have to pay artists or game designers or probably anyone because it's an open source product. The only cost they have is likely hosting the game, which they can probably recoup with the few ads that they show on the site. If Pokemon released a game that looked like Showdown, not only would they get bashed for releasing an ugly game, but it would not have the same appeal. Pokemon Champions right now has a very wide reach because it shows everyone the Pokemon experience that they love in a new setting and exposes them to VGC. If they released Pokemon Showdown as their product, I'm afraid that the majority of people that are playing Pokemon Champions wouldn't have even clicked on it in the first place. It's really easy to hate on the Pokemon Company. I get it. They've pulled a lot of stunts that reek of corporate greed, like releasing a mainline game annually, even if it's half-baked and poorly optimized, and then releasing a DLC for said game before they've even fixed all of the problems. They're extremely litigious and sue anyone and anything that looks like Pokemon. I hate to be this guy, but I have to ask, what did you expect? A company can't just run a game for free, especially if they plan on keeping it running with frequent updates. This is now the permanent house of competitive Pokemon, and live service games need a way to stay profitable for the company. And there's pretty much two ways to do that right now: subscriptions or microtransactions. I know which of the two I prefer. In spite of every pro Showdown argument I have made, I believe that Pokemon Champions is, if nothing else, a large stride in the right direction for competitive Pokemon. If this game does reach a broader audience than VGC ever has, the Pokemon Company will be a lot more willing to give it the TLC that it deserves. Maybe they'll finally be able to balance Pokemon around competitive instead of also having to consider how the Pokemon feel in the main games. If your intent is to just hate on this game because it didn't match every dream you ever had about it, I encourage you to just go back to Showdown and play Regulation MA there. If you believe that Showdown is so much better, you can actually still just go and use that. Even if, after hearing the points that I have made in favor of Pokemon Champions, you still feel that way, then likely Pokemon Champions just wasn't made for you. And that's fine. But you don't have to go trying to throw this game in the dumpster and souring other people's opinions of it just because it didn't match your expectations. I agree that there is a lot that Pokemon probably could have done better with Pokemon Champions. I think that there are some inherent design flaws that harm VGC, like the capped box size and the price tag on reshaping your team. But I think that the growth that this will bring to competitive Pokemon will far outweigh any negatives that I can bring up. That's all I've got, folks. If you've got more to add, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. I'll see y'all next time. Until then, take it easy.